Hey everyone, it's Kathie. Thank you so much for joining me. So today I have 5 card shares. We're going to be featuring the August 2022 Paper Pumpkin Kit. And we're going to get started with the first card. We're going to be using the ink colors that came in the kit, which is Crushed Curry and Soft Suede. And starting off with this panel here, I'm going to stamp out 3 sunflowers, 1 bigger in the center and then 2 small ones on each side. So we're just stamping out half of the sunflower. Now, after I finished stamping out the sunflowers, I kind of noticed that they were a little bit sparse. And so I decided to just partially ink up some of the petals and then just stamp across each flower. And that way you get a fuller sunflower. I think it turned out pretty good. And then shortly we're going to add back some details using the Daffodil Delight and also Pumpkin Pie. Starting off with the lightest color, we're just going to incorporate everything by coloring in the sunflowers with the lightest color. And I'm just doing simple coloring, nothing major, not a solid color. I do leave some white areas for highlights. And then using the next color, I'm just drawing in the details. So drawing back the petals or just creating petals where it needs it. So I'm just going to do that for each of the sunflowers. And with the next color, which is Pumpkin Pie, I'm doing the same thing. I'm trying to be a little bit more daintier as I create each petal. Not as heavy-handed, but doesn't look like I was. Too light-handed there. Some of them are a little bit thick than others. But nonetheless, it still turned out just fine. So we're just going to speed through it now. I did decide to leave most of the footage in there this time. And now for the centers of the flowers, second generation soft suede. And I was a little bit off there, so we're going to fix that shortly. And we're going to also be using the Stampin' Blend markers, using the same color, soft suede. And when you do this, make sure you leave some white bits here and there. And then with Pumpkin Pie, I'm just filling in the white areas that were left. So we're just going to define that center, and it'll look much more realistic. And then with the darker soft suede, we're going to focus a little bit to the left of the center there for the shadowing and still keep little white sections here and there. And then I do use the other end of the marker and just kind of added some dots here and there. All right, now we're on to Granny Apple Green, and we're going to stamp some leaves. I'm going to use the sunflower die cut piece as a mask. And then I'm going to use this leaf stamp. So partially ink that up. And it's okay if it doesn't connect with the sunflower, because we're going to fix that with the markers when we color it in. Oh, and I got a little bit of ink on the panel, but we're going to fix that shortly. All right, so with Granny Apple Green markers, starting off with the light color, just coloring it in, leaving little white parts. And then with the darker marker, just color the bottom and then the center, and then back with the lighter color, just to blend it all in. All right, so we're going to do that across all of the leaves. Super easy, right? And so sorry I did not wash my hand where it says dog. I went to the C&E in Toronto. I waited 2 years for it to come back, so I was all excited. But at the end, it was the same old, and all I got was sore legs. All right, on to the sprig. We're going to use the soft suede. And we're doing 3rd generation here, so we want it to be really light, not too dark. So we'll just stamp across. And we're going to do the sentiment next using the same color. And the sentiment is the larger one that came in the kit. And then to hide that little mark, I'm using the double-winged bee. So 2 of those. And then I'm going to stamp 2 of the single-winged bee. And then to color the bees, just a little bit of yellow, a little bit of black, and then I use a little bit of blue on the wings. And then we'll just mount that onto a slim mini card base. And that's it for the first one, just a lot of stamping. And I think it turned out pretty good. All right, so on to the next card. And we're creating a wreath, so we needed something that was round, not too big, not too small. And this ribbon holder from Stampin' Up, that one was a perfect size. We're going to use the 2 leaf stamps. And then starting off with the actual leaf shape, using Granny Apple Green, we're going to start off with a base. So I'm going to stamp around that circle. I kind of had a vision on what I was going to do here, but it didn't turn out the way I thought it was going to turn out because it kind of started looking like a hot mess. And then the next step here is where I was filling out the spots by partially stamping or partially inking up the stamp, but it still looked kind of icky. But I decided to keep going because I'm going to be using this next stamp, which is the sprig type shape. And again, we're going to fill out the wreath. And also at the same time, we're going to shape it. So I think it's starting to come together. And you won't even notice at the end how we started. All right, crushed curries next. And we're going to partially stamp with the sprig stamp again. And we're just going to stamp around that whole wreath. So don't fill it up entirely. Just kind of stagger it a little bit. The next color we're going to use is soft suede. And again, partially inking up the stamp. And this time we're going to only stamp sparingly on the image, not too much. We just want a little bit of contrast. Okay, now onto the Granny Apple Green markers. We're just going to incorporate the whole wreath so it's as one. And then with the darker marker, a few strokes here and there to add some additional contrast. And I decided to use some twine. I have this gold twine that is no longer available, but will be eventually one day. It'll come back. So I do keep it in my stash. It's one of my favorites because it's such an easy twine to work with. So I twirled that around 3 times if I didn't mention that. And then some glue dots to reinforce it. And then I decided to use the floral die cut piece. And I did already have a bow ready there. So there it is. I think it's about 3 strands together, and then I tied a bow so it's nice and full. As well, I'm going to add a little bee in the corner there. And I felt that it was better to have a small sentiment, nothing giant. So I did cut back one of the labels, stamped the hello from the kit, and then just stuck it right by where the bow is. So it's not too big of a sentiment. I think it's just perfect for the size of the wreath. And then just add additional glue dots. And I thought it needed some bling, so I pulled out the basic jewels. I can't remember what it's called. Just the teeny tiny ones, just perfect to add a little bit of sparkle. So here's where I'm creating the little mini slimline card. So it's 6.5 by 7 inches and scored at 3.5 inches. And then I'm creating a back panel. So garden green, 3.25 by 6.25. All right, so I just mounted the wreath panel onto the garden green and then the garden green onto the mini card base. So that's it. Super easy, right? So here's a couple of stills of the finished card, and then we're going to go into the next card. All right, card number 3. We're going to measure about 3/4 inch from the edge and then draw a pencil line. And then using that sprig stamp with Granny Apple Green, we're just going to stamp across the panel by staggering it a little bit. Just making sure that I don't have any extra ink to get on that panel. And then crushed curries next. Same stamp, but partially inking that up. And then we'll just stamp across the panel again. All right, on the other side of the panel, 3/4 inch from the edge, mark the center, and then stamp the sentiment. And then onto the gold foil piece, I'm cutting back about 2 rows. So 2 of those. And I decided to add that at the very top just to add some additional interest to the card because otherwise it looked a little bare. All right, I'm going to stick down the bigger piece first. And I did squirt some glue on my mat there and just dabbed it with my finger. So that way you have lots of control. And then for the second piece, just be careful and make sure you line it up really well. And then we'll just remove the excess. Now, just below the sentiment, it looked a little bit bare, and I was going through so many different variations of what to add there. And at the end, I decided on stamping out the double-winged bee. And I added just a little bit of color to it. A little yellow, black, and then a little blue on the wings. And then I just lifted each wing up just to make it look a little more 3D. And I mounted it onto a garden green panel and again onto a mini card base. All right, so that's that card. Super easy, but the top part was maybe a little bit fussy, but you can do it. All right, next card. This one is going to be a little extra fussy, a few more extra steps as well. So using that round stamp, which was the center of the sunflower, using crushed curry, I am dabbing off the center just so it won't be as strong. You only need 4, but I stamped 5. And then with Daffodil Delight, we're going to draw some curved lines on each one of these. So these are going to be little pumpkins. So starting off with the lighter color, just drawing in the curved lines. And the curved lines are needed so it gives that round ball illusion, because if you just draw straight lines, it'll look flat. So I started off with the lighter color and then with the darker Daffodil Delight. And I do make sure I leave some white sections. And then the final color is Pumpkin Pie. And I think I used the other end as well, the bullet end. So again, drawing in the curved lines. And then once I'm finished with that, I come in with the lightest Daffodil Delight color to go over the dark lines, and that way it kind of softens it up a little bit. And then I decided to bring in the Jelly Roll white pen just to add some highlights to the pumpkins. And then with a fine tip Sharpie, I'm adding in the pumpkin stumps, I guess. I don't know what you call them, but it's the stumpy thing at the top of the pumpkin. Just make sure when you draw them, you come into the image and then create a little curve. So don't draw your stumps on the very top of the image or it'll look kind of weird. And then pick your 4 best pumpkins and fussy cut them out. I'm just adding a few more highlights there. Now this green panel came from the kit. I cut it down 3 1/4 by 6 1/4. And then the white panel 3 by 6. And then with the white panel, I'm just going to cut it down to 3 1/4 inches and 1 1/2 inches on the other side. And when you place these white panels onto the green, just make sure you turn it the other way so the crease is at the bottom. And again, I have glue on my mat there and just adding it onto the honeycomb panel. And then we'll stick the white panels to it. And then we'll just cut them back. All right, so we're just going to stick these down. Now that big thick band at the top, make sure it's at the top on the bigger panel, and then the smaller panel, make sure it's at the bottom, facing the pumpkins. Okay, we're going to add dimensionals to each of the pumpkins, and when you place it, make sure they're kind of angled to the left and to the right. And off screen, I actually created a sunflower. So here's a quick look of it. I think it turned out pretty good. And then we're going to cut it, about 3/4 of it. We're going to keep. I was thinking about sticking the other side or the other piece above the pumpkins, but it kind of looked weird. So I was thinking about what to put above the pumpkins. And while I was doing that, I mounted the card and also created the sentiment. Just stamped out the sentiment and created a little flag at the end. And then I did use one of the purple pieces that came in the kit as an accent. And here's the finished product. I did tie another bow with the gold twine and just stuck it on the top. All right, last card. Another green panel, 2 1/4 by 4 1/4 inches. And we're going to use Mossy Meadow ink. With the sprig stamp, we're going to just stamp around the whole panel. So I figured I'd carry on and use up the green that I kind of chopped up. And then with the other leaf stamp, we're just going to stamp 3 of these out. Obviously, I couldn't decide, but it didn't matter at the end. All right, we're going to fussy cut these out, but we're not going to cut them out to the shape that we stamped them as. We're going to create little holly leaves, so as you cut it, you're going to go in and out, and they are going to come out a little bit thinner, but that's okay. And this cardstock has a white core, so I'm bringing in the Mossy Meadow Stampin' Write marker and just coloring in the core there. And then there's one holly leaf there that was a little bit too light, so I'm just darkening up the bottom part of it. And now I'm just going to stick down that panel onto a side folding card base. And I was just going to have holly leaves on the panel there, but I decided to use the floral die cut piece. So I cut out 2 of the leaves that has the flower accent on it and stuck the 1 leaf from the floral piece to the one that I just created, and then the 2 that I just created together, and then the additional floral leaf piece. It kind of looks like a swag. And the floral die cut piece that's left over, I added that to the swag as an additional accent, which I think was just perfect. All right, so I felt that the green panel needed a little something extra, so I did fish out of my garbage the gold piece that I thought I didn't need earlier, and it fit just perfectly. And then I added some gold sequins from my stash, and I think that was just the perfect finishing touch. All right, so some stills of all the cards in just a moment, and a close-up of each one of them. I think they all turned out pretty neat, and it was a lot of fun creating them. You can definitely make a ton of alternatives with this kit, but it looks like we're going to be moving on pretty soon. So, hope you enjoyed today's card share. Thanks so much for joining me. Bye for now.